To know the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News. We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
we're absolutely everywhere.
across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland. On TV,
on radio and online. We're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farrar, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me! And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farrar.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know. The latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
"12 o'clock on the spot. Hello and welcome. I am Alastair Stewart, and for the next 2 hours, I'll be keeping you company on TV and radio with the stories that really matter across the country. We are live at the Labour Party conference that's just heard an absolute barnstormer of a speech from Deputy Leader Angela Rayner. And we also have a top lineup of guests with their thoughts on that and the first few turbulent days of the Liz Truss government. But first, let's bring you right up to date with all of the day's news so far. Here's Ray Addison.
Thanks, Alistair. Coming up to 1 minute past 12, here's the latest from the GB newsroom. As the Labour Party conference gets underway in Liverpool, Sir Keir Starmer has announced plans to end the UK's dependence on fossil fuels by 2030. The leader of the opposition will use the annual gathering to set out his energy plan and appeal to voters who are, as he says, sick and tired of soaring energy costs. Sir Keir claims that generating electricity through renewable and nuclear power would save each household around £475 a year. He opened the conference with a tribute to the late Queen.
She knew that the country she came to symbolise is bigger than any one individual or institution. An example that taught us that whatever challenges we face, the value of service endures. And a reminder that the creativity, the hard work, the enterprise that defines this nation is as abundant now as it ever was.
The Deputy Labour leader has also spoken. She used her speech at the party conference to outline a new code of practice for the public sector, saying Britain is at a crossroads. Angela Rayner laid out plans for a fair work standard. It aims to guarantee job security, training and union access. During her lengthy address in the last few minutes, she also pledged that Labour would raise standards across the economy by clawing back the public's money from those who failed to deliver for taxpayers. Voting is underway in Italy in an election that could see the return of the country's most right-wing government since World War II and its first female prime minister. An alliance led by Giorgia Meloni, called Brothers of Italy, appeared on course for victory when the last opinion polls were published. However, support for the left-leaning Five Star Movement has picked up in recent days. Voting continues until around 10 p.m. UK time. A British fighter freed from Russian-backed forces has admitted he didn't think he would survive. Aidan Aslan told The Sun on Sunday he was beaten and stabbed during the interrogation. He was sentenced to death alongside fellow Briton Sean Pinner, but both were released after 5 months last Wednesday. The Prime Minister is expected to relax immigration rules as part of plans to boost business growth. Employers have been calling for more migrant workers to be given UK visas due to labour shortages. It comes as the number of migrants crossing the English Channel this year passed 32,000. The Defence Secretary plans to spend at least £52 billion on Britain's military in response to Russian aggression. In his first interview since Liz Truss became the new Prime Minister, Ben Wallace said it will be used to grow Britain's armed forces. He told the Sunday Telegraph that the 3% spending increase comes after decades of, quote, defending against cuts. The Foreign Secretary will travel to Asia tomorrow as part of Britain's diplomatic tilt towards the region. The Foreign Ministry says James Cleverly will start his 3-day trip in Japan, then head to South Korea and Singapore. He'll also attend the state funeral of former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe during the trip. COVID testing in Scotland's healthcare system will change from next week. Starting on Wednesday, health and social care workers will no longer need a weekly COVID test. The decision also applies to people admitted to hospital, but care home restrictions remain in place. A clean-up operation is underway after Tropical Storm Fiona devastated Canada's Atlantic coastline. Hundreds of thousands of people are without power, and a state of emergency has been declared, though there's been no reports of any injuries or deaths yet. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has deployed the military to help with the country's recovery.
There have been evacuation orders issued. Hundreds of thousands of people are without power. There are reports of roads washed out and homes destroyed. We've all seen the images. This is a very powerful and dangerous storm.
And a flotilla lit up parts of the River Thames in London last night as a tribute to the late Queen. As part of an installation called Reflections, 150 illuminated boats travelled from Albert Bridge to Tower Bridge. The Queen's row barge Gloriana, rowed by Ben Fogle, was the centrepiece. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's get back to Alastair Stewart and friends.
Ray, thank you very much indeed. It is less than 3 weeks since Liz Truss became Prime Minister. 18 days. But from defeating Rishi Sunak to leading the nation in mourning our longest ever serving monarch, addressing the United Nations, meeting Joe Biden and Macron, on whom she said the jury is still out, it has been a baptism of fire of conflagration proportions. Then there was that budget on Friday. With most budgets, you trawl through the technical issues, the detailed changes at the margins, and watch for rabbits leaping out of the hat. This budget broke every rule in the book. No Office of Budget Responsibility report, not really a budget, with little or no spending detail, and several tenets of Tory faith, keeping borrowing tight, only cutting taxes when it can be fully funded, and sound money, all blown out of the water. That budget and these crazy few days have left us all in fresh territory, and that is what we're going to be talking about today. Is Liz Truss on the right path, even if much of it seems very unfamiliar territory? Do you trust Liz Truss? Is the opposition, as you just heard in Ray's news bulletin, up and running? Is it up to the job of taking her on and perhaps attracting your vote if she falters? She and Kwasi Kwarteng have their cheerleaders and their detractors in the press, in Parliament and in their own party, as does Sir Keir Starmer. His Labour Party leads in the polls, but hardly by a country mile. As they start their party conference this morning in Liverpool, Sir Keir remains taunted as an unexciting leader. The Sunday Times magazine today even celebrates Wes Streeting as the charismatic face of the Labour Party. Ouch. Starmer says he'll restore the top rate of tax cut by the Tories, but retain their 1 penny cut in the basic rate. The left also want him to back strikes, including on the trains, but he declines to, although Angie Rayner just addressed that issue quite directly in her speech. They're also very cross about his continuing efforts to shift the party to the centre ground, and we've just seen them singing God Save the King with the Union flag flying in the background. There's also the Lib Dems, who've had a string of stellar by-election results but flounder in the polls, just in double figures. It's reported again in today's newspapers that they may have cut an electoral pact with Labour. We'll be talking to a top Lib Dem a little later in the programme. So there you have it. How fares the great ship of state in your view? We're going to hear from top politicians from all sides, senior commentators, and I hope, very importantly, your good selves. As always, you can email us, gbviews@gbnews.co.uk. You can tweet me directly or at GBNews, or you can go onto Facebook. You've already started really well. We'll share some later, but do keep them coming. And joining me first is an old friend of mine and an old friend of this programme, John Rentoul, the chief political commentator at the Independent newspaper. John, always a joy to see you. Angie Rayner's just sat down. We're waiting for Annalise Dodds in a moment, the chair of the party. What do you make of it so far with that big slogan in the background, a fairer, green future, but also the observation in the response to the budget that Labour is pro-wealth creation, and Angie just saying it's also pro-self-employment. How's Labour doing?
Well, I think there's been a significant shift in British politics because Liz Truss has opened up a clear ideological gap between the two parties. And I think Keir Starmer's rather surprised to find himself on the right side of public opinion in arguing for a more windfall tax on the oil and gas producers in order to help pay for the programme which the government has copied from Labour of freezing gas and electricity prices. And he's also on the side of public opinion in opposing the top rate income tax cut. So he's got a huge opportunity in front of him. He's looking like a prime minister, and he's got to really get his message across in his big speech on Tuesday.
A fascinating analysis, and in a curious way, that budget which you back referenced in reference to Sir Keir Starmer, it was clearly more philosophical from a Tory point of view than it was purely fiscal. Was that wise of Liz Truss, or is that a shot in the dark?
No, it was unwise and inept, and I think you could tell that an awful lot of Conservative MPs had their doubts about it, and you could see that the markets didn't like it. Not that there was anything particularly new in it. I mean, the markets already knew about about most of the tax cuts. They knew about the huge borrowing to pay for the energy measures. But what they didn't know about was the top rate tax cut, and that's not a significant amount of money. It's $2 billion a year, but it does suggest that that there's going to be political trouble ahead because it's an unpopular measure, and it gives Labour a stick to beat the Conservatives with. And it suggests, I think the market's reacted so badly because it suggests that there's going to be turmoil over the next 2 years. This government is not going to be a success.
Fascinating. You say turmoil. I mean, my understanding of the market reaction was a bit more old-fashioned, and that was that they were terrified by the amounts of money that this government is going to have to borrow to fund those tax cuts, and crucially to fund that help to all of us and now business, thanks to Jacob Rees-Mogg, with our energy prices. Isn't that what's really terrifying the markets and pushing the pound down towards parity?
But they knew that before Kwasi Kwarteng got up to speak on Friday. I mean, perhaps they were expecting him to come up with at least some revenue-raising measures, and perhaps some sort of tax cut skewed towards those on lower or middle incomes. But he didn't. He doubled down and and went for tax cuts for the rich, which I think is going to be politically toxic for the government. And I think the markets agree. I mean, markets are not particularly rational. Maybe it was only when they saw in black and white the borrowing figures and the tax cuts written down in a Treasury document that they took fright. But they knew most of what was coming on Friday.
Yeah, I take that point. I mean, what none of us knew was coming on Friday was that she would actually do, Liz Truss and her Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng, exactly what they'd said they would do during the leadership campaign. Throw out the Treasury orthodoxy, slash cuts, go for growth. I mean, maybe the markets thought, blimey, we've got a political leader now who actually does what she says. And what's more, John, she says she doesn't care about those criticisms. She thinks she's right and she's going to stick to her guns.
Well, that's exactly the sort of thing that will spook the markets, because they've realised that she actually means what she says, and she is prepared to do as nonsensical and politically damaging things as she said she was. They assumed that, once she became leader, she was going to start tacking towards the centre and towards giving swing voters in marginal constituencies what they want. But instead of coming up with tax cuts for people on lower middle incomes, every single measure in the budget was something that those on higher incomes benefit more from than those on lower incomes. And that, I think, it was the political ineptness of that really scared the markets.
Final point, John, and just reminding folk listening to our conversation, you've written eloquently and extensively about Tony Blair and know him very well. What's Sir Keir Starmer got to do to retake the ground that Tony Blair once occupied, when Tony Blair seems to be as much a source of ideas for Labour right now, as indeed does Gordon Brown on things like reform of the House of Lords? That's quite worrying when the thoughts are coming from elsewhere and Murdoch Sunday Times says, oh, look at Wes Streeting, he's much more interesting. What's Keir got to do?
Well, I don't think he needs to worry about Wes Streeting at the moment, because he cannot believe that the Tories have just vacated the centre ground. I mean, this time last year, the Labour Party looked as if it was searching desperately for a problem that the nation might want it to solve. But now it's got a problem that the nation wants it to solve, which is getting rid of a Conservative government that seems to be attached to an economic policy that isn't going to work, and that most people in this country think is deeply, deeply unfair. And I think that's an opportunity. I mean, Keir Starmer has suddenly become the centre ground, the king of the centre ground, without any help from Tony Blair or Gordon Brown. It's all down to Liz Truss running away, and that gives Labour a historic opportunity. And I mean, obviously the next election's 2 years away, but at the moment, I think he's looking extremely well placed for the next election.
John, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for spending time with us today, and hope you enjoy the rest of your Sunday afternoon. Good to see you, John. Thanks. John Rentoul there, the chief political commentator at The Independent. And sitting here with me in the studio, I'm delighted to say, is another chum and another brilliant political commentator, Mr. Benedict Spence, no less. Good to see you. You were outside just as I was coming in with all my papers and stuff like that, listening intently to the Angie Rayner speech, and I said to you, bear in mind in analysing that what Rachel Reeves also said in response to the budget. There's Rachel saying Labour believes in wealth creation, and there's Angie saying Labour believe in self-employment. Rentoul's right, the ground has profoundly shifted.
Absolutely. I mean, almost out of nowhere, you had this... What I thought actually about the speech, and I thought about Rachel Reeves' response to Kwasi Kwarteng the other day, was suddenly there's confidence that there wasn't there in the Labour front benches under Boris Johnson, because it was that constant fight for the centre ground that Boris Johnson had just co-opted, and he was just squatting on top of it, and he wasn't going to vacate it. You know, we all remember the talk about the red wall seats and Boris Johnson offering this sort of new covenant to former Labour voters. Now it's just evaporated out of nowhere. It's gone. And as you say, Liz Truss has veered very sharply in one direction. And, you know, Keir Starmer hasn't had to do anything. He's just had to sit there and bide his time and wait. And
is that fascinating? I was going to come... No, but I'll jump ahead of you because I've got your logic. I don't think he can just sit there, because I think now, as I said to John Rentoul, intellectually you've still got Blair and Brown outflanking him, raves from the grave, and you've got both of us quoting not Keir Starmer, but Angie Rayner and Rachel Reeves. That's a problem for a leader of a party.
I think it will end up being a bit of a problem if he doesn't do something about it. But actually, I think up until this point, he's I wouldn't say there's some sort of brilliant strategy, but he has, by not making too much of a fuss, not drawing too much attention to himself, managed to wait for the Tory party to commit harikiri and replace its biggest electoral asset with a real unknown. And, it's going to be very interesting to see whether or not somebody who does have a real dearth in charisma and isn't, perhaps big on policies, whatever you might think about this new green energy plan, up until this point he has not, come out with anything particularly.
And it's not new. Last year was green energy.
Exactly. It's not particularly exciting or invigorating. He has managed to find himself in this position. It's a question now, I think, of whether or not Liz Truss going for broke works or not, because it's a real Hail Mary pass. That's what she's gone for.
You know and I know, but just to share it with folk at home in case they haven't spotted it, there's a really important set of polling data in the Sun newspaper, the country's most widely read newspaper, and it does echo the point that John Rentoul made, that the lifting the cap on bankers' bonuses is only supported by 28% of people, and cutting the top rate, 45% of income tax, is only supported by about 30%.
Yeah.
The rest of it is overwhelmingly welcomed in the country by ordinary folk who are the voters that matter. We can run away with ourselves a little, can't we?
Well, I think it's very interesting that in the papers today, on the front page of the Express, for example, you've got Kwasi Kwarteng saying that more is coming. I suspect that what they have done is get the really... the things that are going to be electorally toxic, they've got it out of the way early with this, sort of go for broke sort of, what is it they call it, fiscal event. They've got it out of the way early. It's out there now. There's only so much sort of hay that Labour can make with it. What comes next is what's going to be very important. Kwasi Kwarteng says that there are going to be tax cuts. One imagines that certain industries are going to get help. That'll be actually, I think, where Liz Truss is made or broken. I think it is the key thing. So whilst, yes, you're right, at the moment we're all sitting here going, this is terribly toxic, it's very unpopular, nobody's going to particularly enjoy it. There is 2 years to go, and there's plenty more rabbits to be pulled out of the hat to see, what they're going to do for ordinary people. Because you're right, if this was it, if this was the be-all and end-all, you'd be sitting here going, well, that's a very bold approach to take. But there is still plenty more opportunity. And, ultimately, there's also the possibility that they can steal Labour's thunder by then going in for the
brave is one of the most critical comments on any political action.
I realised it the second I said it.
We're going to move on. I've asked you if you'd be willing to stay and come back at 1 o'clock again, when we'll have heard from a lot more other people, and we'll have heard a lot more from the Labour conference as well, and we'll then reflect on where we are there at 1 o'clock. But for the time being, Benedict Spence, a genuine pleasure to see you, and thanks for those thoughts. Benedict Spence there, commentator. I'm delighted to say that joining me now is my third contributor at this juncture, and there he is, just waiting for him to pop up. Mark O'Longy, Conservative Member of Parliament for Dudley North, good friend of this programme, and we've spoken before. Great to see you. Thanks for fitting us in. I want to take 2 steps back, but I think folk at home will follow my logic, and I know you will. In the leadership campaign, you were very much a sort of fresh start guy, backing Kemi Badenoch. So, given that, how do you think Liz is doing so far in what's been a tempestuous first 3 weeks?
I think she's doing exceptionally well, and I've always been a huge fan of Liz's, even when I started as a parliamentarian, first off in 2019. When I decided to back Kemi, I made a calculated decision at the time in terms of what I felt that my voters would have sought in the first instance, before we even had an opportunity to listen to all of the candidates and the debates. And in Kemi, I saw someone who reflected that, because Kemi was very strong in backing Brexit all the way, and I represent a constituency that is approximately 75% Brexit backing, which means that some of my wards are probably on average even more so than that, given that obviously I have some that are more on the Remain side. So that was the clear message that I had from my constituents at the time. But soon after Kemi was not in the race anymore, I made it very clear that I was backing Liz all the way. And I have done, even in the chamber from day one, because I've seen in her someone who always delivers and someone who actually does what she says she's going to do. So I'm 100% behind Liz.
Fascinating. And on the budget, you said to the Express, economic growth and tax cuts will help people a lot, and it won't take long for them to feel the positive effect. You've only got 2 years.
That's right. Time isn't on our side. You're absolutely right with that. But I do feel that the majority of this country now will recognise that the Conservative Party is on their side. You know, the hard-working people that we keep talking about. People are talking about this budget being ideologically a massive shift to the right and all the rest of it. Well, of course, you know, let the institutions say that. But I don't believe that a reduction on a penny in income tax is anything particularly right-wing. I don't believe that scrapping the proposed increase in national insurance is anything right-wing, because proportionately it's actually going to be helping working-class people more than it is people on the higher end of things. And, you know, people can criticise the government for saying, you know, if you look at the speeches coming out of the Labour Party, oh, we are going to be greener than green. And where have they been for the last 3 years? You know, the Conservative government has led the planet on green economic change. So all they're trying to do is copy what the Conservative Party has done for the last 3 years.
One of the other things that you mentioned there in passing, and I said it in my earlier conversations, that Liz Truss may have shocked the political world and the financial world by being a politician who actually does what she says she was going to do. But there are reports of grave concern within your own party and folk that we've talked to, and that is that if that massive level of borrowing and the money market's response to it pushes the pound down to parity with the dollar, £1, $1, there are even people on your ranks, on your benches, who will get very windy about this budget package and may even vote against it.
Well, I'd be very surprised if that's the case, Alastair. But what I would say is that whenever we have a sudden shift in what we have become accustomed to, and certainly the Treasury has been operating in a particular way since 2008, then people will automatically try and use a particular set of arguments against what other people might be arguing for. And what we're arguing for now is that more of the same does not work and will not work. We need a government that is going to be bold, and we need growth. We can't keep just redistributing the same size cake. We need to grow that cake so everyone is better off. So for me, if we are talking about, for example, the pound, well, we can obviously boost the pound by increasing interest rates even further. Is that what we want to do when we want to grow the economy? Is that what we want to do when we do have a problem with the cost of living? No, I don't think we want to. And so we do want to maintain the independence of the Bank of England, yes. Me personally, and I'm not an economist, I would have perhaps not increased the rates as much as we have done, because we still want to support the economy growing. And certainly the proposals that Kwasi Kwarteng and the Prime Minister have come forward with will absolutely do that.
Absolutely fascinating. Marco, great to talk to you again, and thanks for breaking into your Sunday to spend some time with us. Really, really helpful. Best of luck to you, and have a great afternoon. Thank you very much indeed. Marco Longy there, the Conservative Member of Parliament for Dudley North. I said Benedict Spence was going away and come back at 1 o'clock, but before he went out, I signalled, listen to this, I'd be really interested to know. I mean, that was fascinating, because it's a Tory backbencher who didn't back her in the campaign, although said he liked some of her ideas.
Yeah.
But I sense that we were listening to someone who was the authentic voice of the Tory backbenchers, and that's much more important to Liz Truss than what you think, I think, or John Rentoul thinks.
Absolutely, and it's going to be fascinating actually to see, given the psychodrama that's played out with Boris Johnson, it's going to be fascinating to see what happens within the party now, because as you pointed out, they don't have very long. They do need to sort of coalesce, and they do need to hope that it works out, because if there is any more of that sort of chafing, people voting down budgets, this and the other, that's potentially even worse than, you know, presenting a united front and it not quite working out.
Delighted to share with you and the folk at home that we've got Damien Green, former Deputy Prime Minister and very senior Tory thinker, coming in at the end of the programme. And I might just put that to him, but for the time being, Benedict, this time I do mean it. Thank you. See you at 1 o'clock. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and indeed Friends. And we've been hearing earlier on in the news bulletin a little of Angela Rayner, the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, speaking within the last half hour or so at the Labour conference in Liverpool. Watching it even more closely than I or anybody else was our political correspondent Tom Harwood, who, as you can see, is live for us there. Well received by my guests here in London in terms of the freshness and the vibrancy of it. What was your take, Tom?
Yes, and speaking to delegates here at the Labour Party conference, they enjoyed it too. It had some elements of policy there, going for this anti-corruption drive, transparency in government, and also reversing some of the outsourcing, what Angela Rayner called insourcing government activities, so that the state does more and doesn't contract it out to private companies. That was another theme of her speech. But overall, I think what made it go down well in the hall was the humour of it. We heard two new nicknames for the Prime Minister, Level Down Liz and Trickle Down Liz. We heard a list of the various scandals the government has got into over the last 3 years, and even a joke about Boris Johnson hiding in a fridge. It was a very, I suppose, enthusiastic speech, light in parts with a bit of detail too. I spoke to some delegates afterwards who really were telling me they wished that Sir Keir Starmer had that kind of energy when he spoke. Really, Angela Rayner there was doing what she is known for, which is being that more of a firebrand speaker, the person that perhaps balances out Sir Keir Starmer's more perfunctory tone with that passion that we have been so used to seeing whenever she covers at Deputy Prime Minister's questions. Overall, this has been a relatively successful start to Labour conference. Of course, they have been ahead in the polls ever since the defenestration of Boris Johnson, perhaps by as much as double digits. And this morning conference began by a tribute to Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, led by Sir Keir Starmer. Now, we're going to get a much fuller set of words from Sir Keir when he does his speech on Tuesday, but just hearing him open conference then, a minute of silence following that, and for the first time ever at Labour Party conference, the national anthem being sung. It went off without a hitch, and the Labour Party will have been pleased with that. Of course, they had a lot of organisation beforehand to make sure it went off without a hitch, even down to printing out the words of the national anthem and handing those words to delegates. Not the longest anthem in the world, not the hardest to remember, but clearly they thought that some people in the room might have needed reminding there. But yes, as things have gone, the Labour Party will be very pleased with how their conference has got off to a start this morning.
Tom Harwood with his souvenir printout of the words to the first verse of the national anthem. Thank you very much indeed, and we'll be going back to the conference as it unfolds. It's a live event by definition, and so if Tom and the team spot something that they think is interesting, we will share it with you. The emails have been coming in thick and fast, for which we are grateful. Bernie says we need a period of stability. Instead, we got a massive throw of the dice. But Osh says Truss has conviction and is delivering a clear philosophy. So keep those coming in, and we'll share more of them as the programme progresses. You are watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends, with lots more coming up on the programme. Lee is a red wall seat that's been held by Labour since 1922. That is until the Tories won it in 2019. With the Labour Party holding their conference in the northwest, our reporter Sophie Reaper talks to local residents of Lee about what they need to see to win the seat back. But first, let's bring you up to date right across the country with the weather.
Wet and windy for northern Scotland this afternoon, but dry with sunny spells further south. Let's take a look at the details. So, a windy afternoon for northern Scotland with coastal gales as a band of rain, heavy at times, pushes southwards, then clearing to sunny spells and showers, highs of 15 Celsius. A cloudy afternoon for much of Northern Ireland with a few light showers and some brighter spells. Winds will strengthen in the late afternoon. Northern England will see some bright or sunny spells as well as a few light showers, and it will become breezier. Maximum temperatures around 15 Celsius. A rather cloudy afternoon for North Wales with some bright or sunny spells at times and one or two light showers too. Turning breezy along the north coast with highs here also around 15 Celsius. It'll stay dry for the East Midlands with sunny spells and light winds. Temperatures will peak at around the average for this time of year, that's around 16 Celsius. A pleasant autumn afternoon for East Anglia with some longer sunny spells and light winds, although it may be a touch breezier towards the coast. Highs of 16. Southern England will see a fine afternoon with sunny spells and light winds. Afternoon temperatures are likely to peak along the south coast with highs of 18 or 19 Celsius. Throughout the rest of the day, rain and stronger winds will continue southwards across the north of the UK. That's how the weather is shaping us up across the rest of the day.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you.
To each and every one of you.
For helping our great nation.
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales
And Northern Ireland. On TV.
on radio and online. We're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me! And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
It's 12:34. I'm Ray Addison in the GB newsroom. As the Labour Party conference gets underway in Liverpool, Sir Keir Starmer has announced plans to end the UK's dependence on fossil fuels by 2030. The leader of the opposition will use the annual gathering to set out his energy plan and appeal to voters who are, as he says, sick and tired of soaring energy costs. He opened the conference earlier with a tribute to the late Queen.
She knew that the country she came to symbolise is bigger than any one individual or institution. An example that taught us that whatever challenges we face, the value of service endures. And a reminder that the creativity, the hard work, the enterprise that defines this nation is as abundant now as it ever was.
The Deputy Labour leader says Britain is at a crossroads as she addressed her party's annual conference. During a lengthy address in the last hour, Angela Rayner outlined Labour's plans for new rights for workers, announcing what she calls a fair work standard. It aims to guarantee job security, training and union access.
We were in 1997, we're now at a crossroads. The moment of choice is upon us. Our movement to show our country what we can do together. The next Labour government will pump money back into the pockets of local communities, the people who built Britain.
COVID testing in Scotland's healthcare system will change from next week. Starting Wednesday, health and social care workers will no longer need a weekly COVID test. The decision also applies to people admitted to hospital, but care home restrictions remain in place. A clean-up operation is underway after Tropical Storm Fiona devastated Canada's Atlantic coastline. Hundreds of thousands of people are without power and a state of emergency has been declared, though there's been no reports of any injuries or deaths. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has deployed the military to help with the country's recovery. We're on TV, online and on DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Back now to Alastair Stewart and friends.
Ray, thanks very much indeed. In the 2019 general election, several constituencies in the North West voted Conservative for the first time in years. Workington in Cumbria, Bolton North East in Greater Manchester and Blackpool South in Lancashire, to name but a few. Lee was Andy Burnham's former constituency, and we'll be hearing from him later in conversation with Gloria De Piero. It's where we also held the People's Forum back in the leadership race. So, our North West of England reporter Sophie Reaper joins us live now from Lee to tell us what the constituency is thinking about right now and what it's looking for from Labour to maybe just tempt it back. From the gymnasium in Lee, Sophie, over to you. We had a sound problem there. I'm not going to go back to it until I hear in my ear for 100% certainty that we've now got it. We haven't got her, so we're going to sort that out. In the meantime, in the link just before the break and Ray's weather, I began the process of sharing back some of it. I've got 4 pages of it already, what you've said to me so far in response to my overnight tweet about who is going to be on the programme. Sadie says, yes, it has been a turbulent 3 weeks. However, Truss gave a passionate speech about the Ukraine at the United Nations. I think you may have just heard Sophie coming in at that point. I'll read one more, because I'm not going to chop and change until I know it's going to work. Derek says, plan for the economy? Check. Going to sort out the Northern Ireland Protocol nonsense? Check. Has the measure of sturgeon? Check. A good start for supporters of our United Kingdom. And Sam says, I imagine the point of the budget and long-term policy is to encourage rich people to give up on failing public services and boost the private healthcare and education sectors. Rich people won't fight for services that they don't use. Interesting, Sam, that's something that Michael Heseltine used to say years and years ago. And Paul says, when you earn up to £50,000, there is no way of avoiding tax. But when you're in the top 1% of earners, dedicated teams will help you avoid paying it both legally and otherwise. And I think I've got time for one more, which is Jamie. Yes, here it is. Wait, isn't all of this just common sense? Like, obviously, if a tax which weighs on the wealthiest more heavily is cut, then it's going to benefit the wealthiest. That's about the row, that if you make a percentage change to a tax, if you impose it, then those who earn more pay more, and those who earn less pay less. But if you cut it by a percentage number as well, then the reverse operates. There's quite a row going on out there about, oh, it's only just for the rich, it's not for the poor. That's the way percentages work. OK, I do believe in being totally 100% honest with you. We haven't sorted out the sound link between us and Sophie up in Lee. We are still working upon it. Meantime, we are going to take a short break, and after that we'll have Gloria De Piero talking to Andy Burnham, and at the end of the programme, I'm delighted to say, I'll also be talking to Damien Green. But first, a quick break.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland. On TV,
on radio and online. We're proud to be
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me! And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Welcome back. The time is 12:42, 18 minutes to 1. You're watching Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News TV and radio. Those sound problems twixt us and Lee are still existing whilst we sort them out. We're going to move on. The Labour Party conference is, as you've seen already, underway in Liverpool, and we'll be popping back across as things unfold. But to help set the scene, I'm delighted to say that my very good friend Gloria Di Piero has secured another cracker of an interview, and with perfect timing. No longer in Parliament, but a former senior minister who has seen by many as a potential leader of the party, the Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, joined Gloria, and here is what they talked about.
Andy Burnham, great to see you. Thank you for your time. You're a popular man. This won't be the first interview you're giving today. I just listened to an earlier interview this morning, actually. When you were asked about tax cuts, your message was now is not the time for tax cuts. But you wouldn't actually say Labour should go into an election promising to increase taxes on people on average wages.
No, it's not about a tax increase, Gloria. I'm just saying leave things where they are, because we're going to have to help the NHS in this period that we're in. We're going to have to find money for nurses, for their pay. There's obviously pressures across the public sector. We're going to have to keep public services running through this really difficult time. So I'm not saying increase taxes, but I'm just saying use that money to keep public services running, to give targeted help to people whose heads will really be dipping beneath the water in this winter with all of the pressures on people. That's what I would do. I'm only giving you an honest answer as to what I would do. I'm not saying put taxes up on ordinary people. I'm simply saying use the money instead to keep things going, because I think it is that serious. This is a very big crisis, the scale of which we've not seen before.
But the logic of that argument, because obviously the government are going to cut taxes, is that Labour, you wouldn't, when the government have done that, you wouldn't then suggest that Labour reverses it going into the next election and puts taxes back up?
Well, I think that's for another day, to be honest. The question is, would I have done it now? And the answer to that is no, because it doesn't help people this winter anyway. So the effect only is felt from April next year, when obviously the challenge is right here, right now. I did a survey with our disabled people's panel last week. It found that about 60% of disabled people in Greater Manchester have already cut what they're eating. It was quite scary, to be honest with you. I hear all the time that people are living just using the microwave. This is really dangerous. I think we're heading into a mental health crisis as well this winter. And I would use the money to put it into mental health, to ensure nurses have got a fair pay deal, to shore up the NHS. That would be my priority, Gloria. I'm only giving you an honest answer.
Yeah, so on public sector pay, that's because obviously there's loads of public sector strikes going on at the moment. You have been on picket lines with some workers, but you're saying the priority now, if there is going to be any money splashing around through borrowing or whatever, the priority should be public sector pay.
But it certainly should be one priority. And there has to be a pay arrangement, even if it's a one-year deal, just to help them make it work this winter. There just has to be, because how can it be in anyone's interest to have a wave of industrial action over the winter when we're all going to need to rely on public services? It can't make sense. And that's why I don't think we've seen yet a serious response from the government to what's ahead of us.
OK. Now, the government have said that they would like trade union general secretaries to ballot their members when a wage offer is on the table, so they can find out not just what the representatives think, but what the membership think. Now, there'll be all sorts of cost implications associated with that, but is the principle right?
Well, they already have to, and the government are just constantly trying to make it harder and harder for working people to get organised and to stand up for themselves. And why, should this narrative be kind of set that this is wrong, that this is, if you are in a position where your family can't afford to eat properly over the winter, well, it's absolutely right that you should be able to stand with people and say, look, something needs to be done. I can't make this work. So to do that to people who are, the key workers that we once clapped, just to make it harder for them to stand up for themselves, to make the benefit sanctions regime tougher on people, at the same time as you just shower billions on the wealthiest people in this country. I mean, I don't know, how GB News viewers view the budget on Friday, but I'd love to hear how anyone can justify that. It's beyond politics. It gets you into the sphere of morality as far as I'm concerned, and I do describe it as immoral. And I think Friday was the most flagrant act of vandalism on the social cohesion of our country. Basically, they've drawn battle lines with ordinary working people.
What's wrong with them, with unions balloting the membership, though, on a wage offer? Because you said they already do, but I don't think that's the case.
They're tightening, aren't they? They're constantly putting hurdles in front of...
Isn't that fair enough as a principle?
But that's the point. They're trying to make it look, it's just a point of fairness and principle. But the effect of it is obviously to load cost on the trade unions and to make it harder and harder for them to take any action. That's what they're doing. Gloria, you remember 2020, only 2 years ago, they were standing outside Downing Street clapping them. I mean, what's happened? What's changed to create this situation now where they're kind of demonising public sector workers, when in the pandemic they were kind of feting them and they were rightly clapping them. But it just shows you the hollowness of modern politics to me, that they did that 2 years ago and now they're kind of trying to scapegoat them and blame them. It's just not good at all.
OK, let's just move on, because you've been very clear on that. Why is it important to start today's conference by singing God Save the King?
Because we've been through, the biggest sort of national moment of our lives. And, the Queen actually, in the spirit of what I was just talking about, did so much to build national unity. She was there for everyone, wasn't she, all through our lives. And she worked hard, I think, at making sure that all communities and all people felt heard and were seen. And she visited all places, and she did that for all of that time, 70 years. And I think, as we go through this period of change, I think it's right for the main political parties to show that they recognise that and show support for King Charles. I think that's a right and proper thing for a party that seeks to be the next government soon to do. And by the way, Gloria, I'm just going to make this point. I think for the first time since we left government, I'm going to a Labour conference where I think it's odds on that we will have a Labour government between 1 and 2 years. And I think in those circumstances, I think it's right for that government to be clear about running the country in the right way, respecting our late Queen, but also kind of showing that support for King Charles.
Okay, good. You're speaking at loads of Fringe meetings this week. You shouldn't be on the Fringe, some say. You should be speaking from the platform. You're a Northerner, you represented a red wall seat. This party arguably is a little bit London-led. Shouldn't you be speaking from the main platform? Will we see you this week speaking from the main platform? You shouldn't be consigned to the Fringe.
You won't see me. And what can I say? I'm kind of inclined to agree with what you just said. But I don't make the decisions, and obviously there's pressure on the conference timetable. But I do think where you've got Labour mayors making real positive changes, such as putting a cap on bus fares, which we've done now, and people are benefiting from that. Let's showcase that, But Steve Rotherham speaking, which is great and rightly so. But in the 5 years I've been mayor, I did my last speech to Labour conference as a cabinet. Well, last one as a cabinet minister was obviously in 2009, and the last one I did as shadow cabinet was when I left shadow cabinet, and I haven't done one since. But I do think it's important for kind of Labour to say this kind of movement we've got of mayors of the North getting a stronger voice is something we're right behind, and I'll still be pushing them to say, look, come on, let's hear that a bit more.
Okay. Liz Truss is the third Conservative woman Prime Minister. Now, let's assume, in answer to this question, you've said Keir Starmer's going to be the next Prime Minister, there's no vacancy, just for brevity. But does the next Labour leader, does that have to be a woman in your view?
I mean, I would love to see a woman leader of the Labour Party, I'm sure I will. I'm sure it's going to happen soon. And in an ideal world, yes, it would be. But I do think we've got to be careful and just say it will be, because it's nothing to do with me, by the way. I'm doing what I'm doing in Greater Manchester. So this is just a kind of an argument about what's right and proper. It's got to be the best person for the job, hasn't it? It's got to be. Because I think sometimes Labour is perceived by people as saying, well, no, it's kind of that kind of filling the position, ticking the box, which also would undermine the person in that role. It's got to be the right person. But the way I would say is, you do everything possible to support that happening, because obviously it's overdue, isn't it? And we'd all love to see it.
Andy Burnham, as ever, it's a pleasure. Look forward to seeing you here in Liverpool. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Gloria.
Thank you.
Fascinating stuff in terms of the content, but also his explanation as to why he wasn't on the main platform. Andy Burnham there, former Member of Parliament for Lee and Mayor of Greater Manchester, talking to Gloria De Piero. Now, this year's British Food Fortnight has a special focus on food in schools and hospitals. Local authority school caterers and NHS caterers have been working all year toward putting nutritional, seasonal, British-sourced menus on for pupils and indeed for patients for those 2 weeks. For many of the children being served, it'll not only be their only hot meal of the day, it'll be their only meal of the day. The public sector buys £2.6 billion worth of food every year, and the organisers have been working hard to source directly from British farmers and producers where possible. This week's Rural Spotlight, therefore, falls on Sean O'Neill, who has about 100 Dexter beef cattle, which he prides himself on producing sustainably, and he is at the heart of this process. And there he is. Sean, great to see you. How's it going? It's kind of like a campaign, but it's also a statement of the blindingly obvious. People like you produce brilliant British food. It should be available direct to the public sector.
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, it brings the public closer to what we do, which is very important at the minute. Markets are very volatile. We sell direct to the public, but obviously to have the public sector, try to purchase where they can locally can only strengthen us. And it's an excellent initiative. It's been going now for about 20 years. Alexa Robinson takes the lead on it, and they're really energetic and passionate about promoting what we do.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that, and I'm all in favour of it. We bang on about it here on the programme whenever we get the chance. One question I can't recall having asked someone at the front line, an actual farmer, is what the local authorities who run the state schools and what the NHS trusts who obviously run the hospitals, what they're like to deal with, with you as being the provider and them as the customer. Are they as tough as the big supermarket chains and the butchers that you normally work with?
My first impressions would be certainly not. Working with the NHS buyers, especially here in Northern Ireland, they're really keen to shorten that supply chain and try and work with local farmers. The bigger retailers, limited experience with them, but what tends to happen is the smaller farmers or medium-sized farmers become dependent on that outlet. They'll keep pumping money towards those farmers. It all sounds very good to begin with, but then on the whim of the bigger retailer, might want to cut your rates, or they might close that pipeline altogether. So if we can try to work with the public sector a lot more, and they can protect that shorter supply chain and that simpler supply chain, would be much more beneficial.
That's brilliant to hear, because that is a real win-win situation. I'm going to pull you back to something you said in the middle of that response about supply chains, because forget supply chains, as it were, between you as a Dexter farmer of brilliant cattle and the hospitals and the schools. Supply chain to you, what we do know on this programme is that's a real problem for you. Rising cost of electricity, but things like grain and things like fertiliser. It's a heck of a lot tougher being a farmer in Britain right now than it has been for a long time.
It definitely is. With the Dexter cattle being a lower input animal, we're not just as exposed, I would have said, to the grain costs and the fertiliser costs. But what we are exposed to, and is becoming more evident, is the vilification almost of livestock farming in this part of the world. There's studies coming out there saying that the effect on mental health in farmers, it really is not good at the minute, and they feel a real disconnect between the general public and themselves. So what Alexa and the NHS catering managers and everybody's doing with Love British Food is really, really important to try and establish that connection back to the community again. Because in future, the more young people that turn away from the industry is not going to exist in the years to come. And volatility of imports and everything else, there's a possibility that people are going to starve in this country if we don't change that.
I couldn't agree with you more. It's about the fabric of our United Kingdom. Sean, I genuinely wish you well as a farmer of wonderful Dexters, and we saw some of them while you were answering, put some of the pictures up there. But good luck with the British Food Week, and good luck in your very rewarding two-way relationship with the NHS and with our schools. Lovely to talk to you, and have a great weekend, what's left of it. I know you're a busy guy, but thanks for breaking into it to talk to us. Now, you're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends. It's 2 minutes to 1, but we've lots more to come on the other side of that hour, including going back live to the Labour Party conference to get the latest. But first, let's take a quick break.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland. On TV,
on radio and online. We're proud to be
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farrar, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farrar.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Hello and welcome back. If you've been with us since 12 o'clock, hello and welcome. If you've just joined us, you've missed a spectacular hour. It is exactly 1 minute past 1. I am Alastair Stewart and we're into the second and final hour of our programme. We'll be keeping you company on TV and radio. We'll be getting live reaction from the Labour Party conference in Liverpool, and we have a top lineup of political guests with their thoughts on the state of the Conservative Party, that budget, and very much important to me, your thoughts coming up as well. You've been doing it brilliantly so far, and there is more to come. But first, let's bring you right up to date with all of the news so far today. Here is Ray Addison.
Thanks, Alastair. Coming up to 2 minutes past 1, here's the latest from the GB Newsroom. Now, as the Labour Party conference gets underway in Liverpool, Sir Keir Starmer has announced plans to end the UK's dependence on fossil fuels by 2030. The leader of the opposition will use the annual gathering to set out his energy plans and appeal to voters who are, as he says, sick and tired of soaring energy costs. He opened the conference earlier with a tribute to the late Queen.
Knew that the country she came to symbolise is bigger than any one individual or institution. An example that taught us that whatever challenges we face, the value of service endures. And a reminder that the creativity, the hard work, the enterprise that defines this nation is as abundant now as it ever was.
The Deputy Labour leader says Britain is at a crossroads as she addressed her party's annual conference. During a lengthy address within the last hour or so, Angela Rayner also pledged that Labour would raise standards across the economy by clawing back the public's money from those who failed to deliver for taxpayers. She outlined Labour's plans for new rights for workers, announcing what she calls a fair work standard. It aims to guarantee job security, training and union access.
The moment of choice is upon us. Our movement to show our country what we can do together. A Labour government to unite this country through the darkest times ahead. A Labour government to hand power back to the people and the places that once powered Britain. And a Labour government that will always be on the side of working people.
Staying with politics, and voting is underway in Italy in an election that could see the return of the country's most right-wing government since World War II and its first female prime minister. An alliance led by Giorgia Meloni, called Brothers of Italy, appeared on course for victory when the last opinion polls were published. However, support for the left-leaning Five Star movement has picked up in recent days. Voting continues until around 10 p.m. UK time. A British fighter freed from Russian-backed forces has admitted that he didn't think he would survive. Aidan Aslin told The Sun on Sunday he was beaten and stabbed during interrogation. He was sentenced to death alongside fellow Briton Sean Pinner, but both were released last Wednesday. The Prime Minister is expected to relax immigration rules as part of plans to boost business growth. Employers have been calling for more migrant workers to be given UK visas due to labour shortages. It comes as the number of migrants crossing the English Channel this year passed 32,000. The Defence Secretary plans to spend at least £52 billion on Britain's military in response to Russian aggression. In his first interview since Liz Truss became PM, Ben Wallace said it will be used to grow Britain's armed forces. He told the Sunday Telegraph the 3% spending boost comes after decades defending against cuts. The Foreign Secretary will travel to Asia tomorrow as part of Britain's diplomatic tilt towards the region. The Foreign Ministry says James Cleverly will start his 3-day trip in Japan. Then he'll head to South Korea before ending up in Singapore. He'll also attend the state funeral of former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe during the trip. COVID testing in Scotland's healthcare system will change from next week. Starting Wednesday, health and social care workers will no longer need a weekly COVID test. The decision also applies to people admitted to hospital, but care home restrictions will remain in place. A clean-up operation is underway after Tropical Storm Fiona devastated Canada's Atlantic coastline. Hundreds of thousands of people are now without power, and a state of emergency has been declared, though there's been no reports of any deaths. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has deployed the military to help with the country's recovery.
There have been evacuation orders issued. Hundreds of thousands of people are without power. There are reports of roads washed out and homes destroyed. We've all seen the images. This is a very powerful and dangerous storm.
And finally, a flotilla lit up part of the River Thames last night in London as a tribute to the late Queen Elizabeth. As part of an installation called Reflections, 150 illuminated boats travelled from Albert Bridge to Tower Bridge. The Queen's row barge Gloriana, rowed by Ben Fogle, was the centrepiece. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's get back to Alastair Stewart and friends.
Ray, thanks very much indeed. Exactly 7 minutes past 1. This is Alastair Stewart and friends here on GB News, TV and radio. We're into our second and final hour. Prime Minister Liz Truss has only been in number 10 for 18 days, yet she has already led the nation in mourning for our late Queen and met with some of the world's most important and powerful leaders. To top it all, she and Kwasi Kwarteng launched a mini-budget which has been branded as shocking by Labour, who believe that it will only benefit the rich, whilst the poor face a difficult winter. Other die-hard Tories welcome it as being a return to true Tory beliefs. So, has Liz Truss managed to secure the trust that she is after within her own party and within the country? Or is the opposition, with Labour starting their conference in Liverpool today, up to the job of taking her on and perhaps even attracting your vote if she falters? I'm delighted to say that he's had a coffee, stretched his legs, and has come back as I requested him. Benedict Spence, political commentator, is with me again. Let's talk about that second point, because governments lose elections, as history would have us, rather than oppositions winning them. But as we have heard from Angie Rayner and in conversation with Gloria Andy Burnham, they are trying very hard to say, we're ready, we are fit to go. Is that your objective view as well?
I think so. I mean, to use a Boris Johnson expression, if the ball were to come out from the back of the scrum, I think that's sort of what they're waiting for. But it does require a little bit more management than just sitting and waiting, although Liz Truss has certainly given them every opportunity with the severity, if you like, of the direction that she's taken. That's not to say that it necessarily won't work, but it is, it's quite clear from the reaction from amongst Tory MPs, amongst other things, that it's potentially quite dangerous. I suppose really the key thing would be for Liz Truss, more so than Keir Starmer, Liz Truss, I think, will be banking on the idea that, as we talked a lot about how she's sort of, aping Margaret Thatcher and, trying to be very stern, say what she means, then do it, and also to be blunt and to be honest with people and say, look, this is very difficult and it has to be done. And I suppose there are echoes of Boris Johnson during the pandemic and the idea that perhaps the public, even though they might look at a lot of these things and think very unpopular, very ideologically driven, they might sit there and go, but this is an unusual time, and we all need to just trust. But it's whereas if the Labour Party just sit there and the public go with that, then of course it's it's not as easy for the Labour Party. So there does need to be that sort of getting onto the front foot a little bit and being a little bit more progressive, a little bit more ambitious, I suppose, of coming out with their own policies.
But inching it away from policy, I mean, either going down into the mud or up above it, however you come at the question. But there is also the brutal issue of salesmanship, and there are a lot of people out there listening to this conversation who still rue the day that the Tories got rid of Boris Johnson.
Absolutely.
Overwhelmingly for one reason, and that was whether it was Brexit or whether it was the coronavirus phase. God, he was a brilliant salesman. I'm looking to see more salesmanship from Liz Truss, Kwasi Kwarteng.
I mean, it's funny because we were talking in the previous hour about the lack of charisma from Keir Starmer. I mean, a lot more of it is coming from Angela Rayner, and you're hearing a lot more in terms of policy from Tony Blair and Gordon Brown. And I think, the fact that we are hearing a lot from those two in particular, and that we're sort of lamenting, or some people are lamenting, the passing of Boris Johnson for the time being, shows you, I think, actually how generational these politicians are, actually, that they're not the standard kind of figures that these people who can cut through the noise and, get the these policy ideas through that might be very unpopular through to the masses. You know, it is unusual. And so I suppose both Keir Starmer and Liz Truss find themselves with very similar issues, which is that the public, I don't think, perceive either of them as particularly charismatic. I think possibly that it might be a more long-term issue for Keir Starmer because he's had plenty of time to assert some sort of personality, whereas Liz Truss has come straight off the bat, and a lot of people going, she's very wooden, she doesn't communicate very well. Doesn't matter, she's gone, this is what you need to hear, and I don't really care what you think. It needs to be done.
Much more Thatcherite than Johnsonian.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely right. Final point. I'm delighted to say we're going to be talking to Tim Farron, former leader of the Liberal Democrat Party. They are a factor as well. And in a curious sense, if you've got a Prime Minister who passionately believes that she and her Chancellor are absolutely on the money, doing the right thing for growth and so on, you can't avoid the fact, if you're a strategist in number 10 Downing Street, brackets, new owner, Truss, close brackets, of the by-election run that the Liberal Democrats have had, when folk out there, whether it's the leafy suburbs of Surrey or the cosy northwest where Tim has his seat, they will embrace the Liberal Democrats.
It is. You've got a very interesting juxtaposition where you've got, you know, I suppose more traditional old-fashioned Tories might be more inclined to go to the Lib Dems. But one of the things that actually hasn't come up quite so much but will become a real issue is Liz Truss being very pro-immigration. A lot of former Labour voters who went over to Boris Johnson over Brexit are very anti-immigration. That is ultimately what a lot of them voted for Brexit for. They might be tempted back towards Labour because they might be thinking, well, this isn't what we voted for, so we might as well go back to what we know. So that would be a real issue. But I suppose the counter to that, if you are the Tories, is to say, well, look at that. Do you want a coalition government? Really? Is this the moment for that kind of patchwork style of government? Or actually, do we need somebody who, as Liz Truss, again, is promising harsh medicine but firm hand on the tiller?
OK, thank you for that. Stay where you are, because I've just been told that Tim Farron has indeed joined us. It's magic when you're talking about him in conversation, saying, coming along shortly, and then my producer says, Tim's there, ready to go, which is a real delight for me. Former leader of the Liberal Democrat Party, there he is, Tim Farron, and he and I have known each other for a wee while. His seat, Westmoreland and Lonsdale, up in a truly beautiful part of the northwest. Tim, delighted that you could join us, and here's the blunt, simple question, and it flows a little from what Benedict and I were talking about, but it's the macro picture. How do you shift your party from being the magnificent serial victor of by-elections to being a real contestant in this profoundly new, quite electric phase of politics?
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you, Alastair, and thanks very much for having us. It's a good question. Of course, let's first remember that post-coalition, Liberal Democrats weren't even winning by-elections or anything else for that matter. So often it's a case when you've been through the kind of trials and tribulations we have as a party that it takes a while to get back into a position where you're properly in the game. And I think we're properly in the game. I think being competitive in local elections is hugely significant, because without that, you've got no building blocks to ever win parliamentary seats. And yes, over the years, we've had a good reputation at winning by-elections, but that is also part of our ability to be a party that can appeal to people who are looking for a change. And there are many parts of the country where I think we're growing and becoming stronger. The two kind of broad areas where we have become much stronger, in England in particular, are those areas that are, shall we say, the commuter belts around London, Manchester, and then also places like mine. I mean, at the last general election, I think I'm probably right to say that in England, mine was the only seat that didn't go Conservative that was of this sort, a rural constituency. We've now won 2 of them in by-elections. And if you look at our strength in rural parts of the north and the south of England, that we're beginning to grow in strength. People are looking for an alternative. And I think some people in, North Shropshire be a good example of a place where we came third at the last election, but won the by-election. I think the reason is that whilst our floor in places like that might be lower than Labour's floor, our ceiling is higher than Labour's ceiling, and therefore we can win in those seats even though Labour can't. And credibility is 9/10 the problem in politics. If people think you can win, you're in with a shout.
Yeah. And worth reminding folk at home that your seat has been Tory in living memory as well as Liberal Democrat.
Well, beyond living memory. So
absolutely. It goes. Andy Burnham, who I know that you know, just gave a fascinating interview to Gloria De Piero, who you also know. And on the budget, which really does dominate so much of the thinking because it affects everybody's lives, but it's also about political philosophy, Burnham said to Gloria, this budget goes beyond policy and beyond politics. It's about morality, and it's just wrong. You've always been a politician who's been very happy to talk about morality and about values and even about faith. Do you see this budget as being dangerous for the opposition parties like yours because if it goes right, it is going to restore growth? Or is it an open goal because you can bang on about morality and values?
I think it isn't moral to decide at a time of great need when we're having to borrow hundreds of millions, billions indeed, that our children will have to repay, and to be using a good chunk of that to give tax cuts to people who really don't need them. To bankers, to people buying second and third and fourth homes in my constituency, or indeed to people who are on the top rate of income tax. I think that is not moral. I also think it's bad politics. I think there are many people out there who believe that fairness matters. Now, everybody's driven by a level of selfishness. There's no doubt about that. But I think people will see the juxtaposition. We are borrowing vast amounts of money, and some of that money is being borrowed in order to give people who are very wealthy money that they don't need and they probably won't even spend in this country. So I think Andy Burnham is right to say that there's something morally wrong at the heart of this mini budget, but I think it's also economically wrong and will probably be politically counterproductive. I suspect the 1p tax cut for the basic rate will be broadly popular. I don't suppose we will oppose it. We can see a value in giving people on lower middle incomes some of their money back, because they'll spend it, let's be honest. But I don't see any economic value in giving extremely wealthy people more money that they won't spend. At least they won't spend it in this country. So it's not only economically stupid, probably politically counterproductive, I think it is immoral too.
Final question. There's a perennial story about pacts, and it's there again in the Sunday papers today. You can either confirm or deny it, because you will know. You know what Sir Ed's up to and the rest of the team, and you're a part of that team. So either deny it or confirm it. But more importantly, do you think that is right, as we are within a couple of years of a general election, and that's where our conversation started, if you will? Should you consciously go into that election saying, had enough of the Tories, we are offering you a joint Lib-Lab pact again?
No, I mean, I'm fairly confident that won't happen. I am also fairly confident that voters around the country who think it's time to move on from the Conservatives will use their votes intelligently and will vote for one of the opposition parties, depending on whether they're most likely to win in their area. I think that there's no doubt from my perspective that Keir Starmer, having moved the Labour Party away from the hard left, and I think he's done a good job of that, means that there will probably be more exchanging of votes between Labour and Liberal Democrats, and indeed some Conservative voters will feel more or less afraid, shall we say, of a change of government than they might have done if Jeremy Corbyn was still leader of the Labour Party. But no, my job and our job as Liberal Democrats is to go and present what we think to the country and try to win as many places as we can. And as Theresa May found out after 2017, as all party leaders found out after 2010, sometimes you fight an election and you don't win and nobody wins, and you've got to make something of the electoral arithmetic that's left with you, that you're left with. So I'm not saying there won't be any kind of cooperation between different parties after an election. I don't know what the arithmetic's going to be, neither do you. And we'll respond to it when it comes.
Brilliant. I've so enjoyed it, and you must come back any time. You'd be very, very welcome. But let me tell you and our viewers and listeners that answer on the pact was the most honest and candid I've ever heard from either a Liberal Democrat or a Labour Party. Let's look at what the numbers are after the election. We love honesty here on GB News. Tim, have a great Sunday afternoon, and thanks for breaking into it to be with us here. And I look forward to talking to you again very soon. Tim Farron there, former leader of the Liberal Democrat Party and MP for the beautiful constituency constituency of Westmoreland and Lonsdale. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends. Before we kick off with our final 40 minutes, we're going to cross live again, as promised, to Liverpool and the Labour Party conference. Our political correspondent, Tom Harwood, is there live for us now. Been bouncing here as all of my guests have been commenting upon what Angela Rayner said. You've had more speeches, more events unfolding. Bring us right up to date with the Labour Party in Liverpool.
That's right. The Labour Party conference continues to, I suppose it's well and truly got underway now. Of course, it was opened this morning first by a tribute to Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, led by Sir Keir Starmer, where he called her the nation's greatest monarch, which was quite the accolade. There was a minute of respectful silence. There had been worries that this excitable Labour Party might have heckled or there might have been some disturbance, but no, it went smoothly and without a hitch. The people at the top of the Labour Party will be very pleased that that went by so smoothly, so well, and indeed that there was no disturbance too during the singing of the national anthem, something that happened for the first time at this conference. Never has happened at a Labour Party conference before, and was indeed criticised by the former leader of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, for going ahead, but it went ahead smoothly, perhaps in part because people here at the conference were handed these little national anthem lyric notes, or at least the first verse of the national anthem, just so they don't forget all of those very complicated words. But moving on, we had, of course, Angela Rayner's speech, and that was well received in the hall. It had a good few jokes in it. There was some new nicknames for the Prime Minister. Level Down Liz, Trickle Down Liz, she was called by the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party. And indeed, Angela Rayner went on to list the number of what they perceive to be scandals that have engulfed the government over the last 3 years, saying it's time to end 12 years of Tory rule. Liz Truss will, of course, respond to that by trying to say that this is a very new, very fresh, very different government from the way that the country has been governed over the last 12 years. But that will be a battle that I'm sure is fought out in Parliament after these party conferences are over. Today there is more action on the floor of the conference because, of course, unlike the Conservative Party conference, the Labour Party conference is a democratic event. There are delegates that are sent by constituency Labour parties. There are motions that are on the floor that are voted on, agreed to, constitutional items that are changed. However, this year there's a lot less of that constitutional wrangling than there was last year in Brighton, where Sir Keir Starmer managed to get some pretty seismic rule changes through, some threshold raises in terms of the deselection of members of Parliament, things that people on the more, shall we say, Blairite side of the party had been pushing for. Those contentious rule changes were won by Sir Keir Starmer last year, and it does seem that the floor of the Labour Party this year is a little bit less contentious, at least so far. But of course, this is just the first day, just the first few hours of Labour Party conference, and there are still 3.5 days to go, so plenty of time for fireworks, sparks and fun, and we'll keep you up to date with all of it as it happens.
Tom, thank you very much indeed for that succinct update and, more importantly, that promise of more as it comes. Thank you very much indeed, and best to the GB News team down there with you making it all happen. Thank you very much indeed. Tom Harwood there, live from Labour at Liverpool. And one thought just crossed my mind while he was speaking there is relax. If you're, they've all gone Labour, we're not pro any particular political party, but a conference raises the temperature for a party and then we move on to the next one and the next one. It's all balanced here. Plenty more to come this afternoon on Alastair Stewart and Friends. After the break, we'll be hearing more of your thoughts on whether you have trust in our government. Plus, we'll be looking at how we can save money on our energy bills in our Sunday Savings segment. But first, let's bring you up to date with the weather.
Wet and windy for northern Scotland this afternoon, but dry with sunny spells further south. Let's take a look at the details. So a windy afternoon for northern Scotland with coastal gales as a band of rain, heavy at times, pushes southwards, then clearing to sunny spells and showers, highs of 15 Celsius. A cloudy afternoon for much of Northern Ireland with a few light showers and some brighter spells. Winds will strengthen in the late afternoon. Northern England will see some bright or sunny spells as well, as a few light showers, and it will become breezier. Maximum temperatures around 15 Celsius. A rather cloudy afternoon for North Wales, with some bright or sunny spells at times and 1 or 2 light showers too. Turning breezy along the north coast, with highs here also around 15 Celsius. It'll stay dry for the East Midlands with sunny spells and light winds. Temperatures will peak at around the average for this time of year, that's around 16 Celsius. A pleasant autumn afternoon for East Anglia with some longer sunny spells and light winds, although it may be a touch breezier towards the coast. Highs of 16. Southern England will see a fine afternoon with sunny spells and light winds. Afternoon temperatures are likely to peak along the south coast with highs of 18 or 19 Celsius. Throughout the rest of the day, rain and stronger winds will continue southwards across the north of the UK. That's how the weather is shaping us up across the rest of the day.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland. On TV,
on radio and online. We're proud to be
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me! And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Welcome back. It's 28 minutes past 1. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and friends on GB News. I asked you to get in touch with your thoughts, and you have done, which is brilliant. Bernie says, quotes, "We needed a period of stability. Instead, we got a massive throw of the dice." Ian says, "It's an excellent start. There will be more to come in a rapid fire of announcements and changes. One thing that trusts must watch out for is the Rishi-worshipping MPs who even now are plotting to oust her and shoehorn him in, bypassing the membership." And finally, Simon says, "Tax cuts. I'm 100% on board with tax cuts for the very reasons that you've just stated. The issue being discussed here is tax cuts, however, that disproportionately favour just 1% of British taxpayers." Benedict Spence is still with me. Those three seem to perfectly encapsulate the challenge that Truss is facing, as we were talking about earlier on. Folk do see it as favouring the rich, and they do see it as a bit of a roll of the dice.
They do, but I think the email from Bernie saying that you needed a period of stability, I think this is a bit of an issue because a lot of people are harking back to some sort of bygone era where they think everything was slightly better, sort of pre-pandemic. My issue with that is a lot of the sort of the apathy, if you like, or the failure to address underlying structural issues in our economy, in our energy grid, for example, are what have led to the problems now. You can't just sort of go through life and whilst the world is not happening to you, you think, oh yes, everything's fine. And then when it does happen to you, go, oh, I wish everything went back to normal, because that's just not how life works. Actually, we were quite blessed for a large period of time not to undergo a major war in Europe, pandemic, drought, but these things are fairly common. And actually, I think if the public is honest with itself, it does need to look back at that period of so-called stability, such as it was with Brexit, and say it wasn't used particularly well. And maybe what we need is a government that is prepared to be quite aggressive on tackling those issues, so that in future, when we are faced with more, external factors, we aren't caught on the hop quite as badly as we have been this time. Whether that's Liz Truss and her plans, whether that's something else, I don't think that normality has actually presented us with a particularly good outlook.
We're also, and it's come out in conversations and indeed in emails as well, we're back to that profound truth. And that is that you can't have distribution, you can't help the poor, you can't do anything unless you have growth. And that's what Kwarteng is saying, is we're going to get there, even if page one looks a little bit tough on some people, we're going to get there. And Truss in the Mail today talks about, I'm not interested in slices, I'm interested in the size of the cake.
Yeah, and that's the thing. When we talk about, for example, Andy Burnham talking about this budget being, well, not budget, sorry, fiscal event being immoral, that's a bit of an issue, because if you're not creating the economic environment for people to get jobs, to build houses, for there to be that economic growth, that is immoral in of itself. You just allow the state to stagnate and people's standards of living to drop. So I understand. Nobody wants to be the person that says, yes, bankers' bonuses are fantastic and, the rich should get even richer. But ultimately, there do need to be difficult decisions taken. One thing that I thought was very interesting, Fraser Nelson, the editor of The Spectator, wrote yesterday a piece. He said that one of the cohorts in the UK that's probably happiest about this was the charitable sector, because actually it gets most of its donations not from the ordinary man on the street. They get most of their money from the wealthiest, and the cut in that top rate of tax will mean more money goes into the charity sector, which a lot of people won't be sitting there thinking, oh, fantastic, the rich have got more money, but charities will be sitting there going, well, we will have a little bit more to work with.
Absolutely. Final point, and literally 30 seconds, and you know why, because we've got to go to the news. Tim Farron, we won't have an electoral pact with Labour, but we'll count the seats after the general election.
Refreshingly honest. And, as much as they're not saying they're going to have a pact, they're going to be clever about this. They're not going to go hell for leather against each other in the constituencies where one or the other has a chance of unseating the Tories. The nightmare scenario is they do the numbers and they still don't quite have enough at the end after a general election, and then we're all stuck in limbo.
Benedict, pleasure from start to finish. Always good to see you. Thank you very much indeed. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thank you.
Good to see you. Benedict Spencer, political commentator, with his thoughts and his thoughts on your thoughts. So thanks to him, and indeed thanks to you. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends. It's 32 minutes past 1. We've plenty more to come in that final half hour, but let's bring you right up to date with all of the day's news. Here's Ray.
Thanks, Alastair. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. With the Labour Party conference underway in Liverpool, Sir Keir Starmer has announced plans to end the UK's dependence on fossil fuels by 2030. The leader of the opposition will use the annual gathering to set out his energy plan later and appeal to voters who are struggling with soaring energy costs. The Deputy Labour leader says Britain is at a crossroads as she addressed her party's annual conference earlier. Angela Rayner outlined Labour's plans for new workers' rights, announcing what she called a Fair Work Standard. It aims to guarantee job security, training and union access. She also promised to pump money back into the pockets of local communities.
We were in 1997, we're now at a crossroads. The moment of choice is upon us. Our movement to show our country what we can do together. The next Labour government will pump money back into the pockets of local communities, the people who built Britain.
COVID testing in Scotland's healthcare system will change from next week. Starting from Wednesday, health and social care workers will no longer need a weekly COVID test. The decision also applies to people admitted to hospital, but care home restrictions remain in place. A clean-up operation is underway after Tropical Storm Fiona devastated Canada's Atlantic coastline. Hundreds of thousands of people are without power and a state of emergency has been declared. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has deployed the military to help with the country's recovery. We're on TV, online and on DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Back now for Alastair Stewart and Friends.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland. On TV,
on radio and online. We're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Hello and welcome. It is 24 minutes to 2 and you're watching GB News TV online, DAB radio with me, Alastair Stewart and friends. We are going to be looking now at summer savings, and never has our Sunday summer savings slot been more important in the wake, of course, of the budget back on Friday. Can we help you look after your money a little more about those energy bills, fuel prices, food prices, and so much more? I'm delighted to welcome Levi Winchester, who's the money editor of the Daily Mirror and of Mirror Money. Great to see you there. There we are. Brilliant. The last hour and a half, a lot of the conversations have been underlining the fact that this was very much a big picture budget and almost more philosophical than fiscal. But did you as an expert spot opportunities for hard-pressed people to help them get through the next phase of the cost of living crisis?
Hi, Alistair. Yeah, thank you for having me. The mini budget didn't include any additional cost of living payments or any extra immediate support for energy bills this winter, which will undoubtedly be really disappointing news for anyone who is struggling right now. Of course, the government had previously announced that it will introduce a new energy price guarantee, which will cap energy bills at £2,500 a year for someone with typical energy use. Of course, this does mean we won't experience the hideous energy rises that are expected to come next year, but let's not forget that this is still higher than the current Ofgem energy price cap, which is £1,971, and it's also more than £1,000 higher than what people were paying a year ago. One thing we did see in the policy documents for the mini budget is that there will be legislation that will see energy firms obligated to help vulnerable people and low-income households with energy-saving measures. This is something the government says will save people roughly £200, but this won't kick in until April 2023, and at this stage it's unclear exactly how this will work, so it's unlikely to mean much to those who are struggling right now.
Sure. Talking of exactly that, and while you were finishing that answer, we saw a couple who were online seeing their savings and so on. How can folk watching this conversation and listening to it on radio make absolutely sure that they are entitled to what is out there for them, whether it's enough or not enough? It's there. It's a lot of money. Will it happen automatically, or have they got to apply for it? How's that going to work?
Yeah. So the £400 energy bill discount is being applied from October and it's being spread over 6 months. There will be instalments of £66 in October and November, and then discounts of £67 per month from December until March 2023. Now, how you will receive this money depends on how you pay your bill and also your energy supplier. If you pay by direct debit, you'll get the money either applied to your energy account or as a refund into your bank account. If you pay in receipt of your bill, the discount will be applied automatically to your account. Similarly to those with smart meters, where it will be applied directly to your meter. Now, if you're on a traditional prepay meter, you'll be sent vouchers either by text, email, or in the post. So it's really important to keep an eye out for these because they won't be applied to you automatically. You'll have to do it yourself. In terms of the £2,500 energy price guarantee, it's really important to keep an eye on your bills over winter. And if you suspect you're being charged too much, ask your supplier to explain why this is. And also remember that the £2,500 figure is used to illustrate someone with typical use.
Yeah.
So what the actual cap does is a cap on your unit rates and the standing charges. So you could technically be charged more or less than this. It's all down to how much energy you're using.
Absolutely fascinating. And when we finish this conversation, can you stay on the line and have a word with the producer, just so that we can jot down all of... No, serious point. So we can share that on the GB News website, because that was a really succinct point. A final example, help me with, as far as pensioners are concerned, because quite a few folk, they don't go online, they don't necessarily have all of those websites and laptops and pads and the rest of it. Is there help out there specifically for pensioners? Because they've got additional support coming their way, haven't they?
Yes, they have. So if you are currently in receipt of winter fuel payments, which can vary between £100 and £300 depending on your circumstances, then you will receive an additional £300 this winter. Usually the winter fuel allowance comes into place from November, but it can come in all the way up until March next year. So do keep an eye out on this as well in your bank account and make sure you're getting what you're entitled to. It's really important to be informed, especially right now with the cost of living crisis.
Spot on. Levi, really interested and found that incredibly useful, as I'm sure those kind enough to be watching and listening to our conversation. But as I say, I repeat it, I did mean it. Stay on the line when we've done and make sure that my gang have got everything that you've just said and we can bang it out there on the GB News website. Great to talk to you, and hope I can welcome you back again very, very soon. Good to see you. Levi Winchester there, money editor at the Daily Mirror. Now, at 18 minutes to 2, it's been just a little over 3 weeks since Liz Truss became Prime Minister, and in that time so much has happened, with the opinion polls demonstrating that the opposition are remaining ahead. Today we've been seeking to discuss whether we trust the future of this government in the hands of Liz Truss and what the impact of that budget, which we're the first to admit has divided opinion very, very sharply, may be on your view of that. I'm delighted to say that my final guest to offer his views on that is an old friend and is really one of those been there, done it politicians at the highest levels. Damian Green is the Conservative Member of Parliament for Ashford in Kent, a former First Secretary of State, Deputy Prime Minister, former Secretary of State for Work and Pensions and Minister for the Cabinet Office. So there we are. How are you left feeling, Damian, after those 18 turbulent days that have seen so much for this new Prime Minister?
Well, it's an extraordinary mix of external events, most obviously the sad death of the Queen, and events that the Prime Minister has wanted to generate. She said that she wanted a radical new approach, and she knows that there's probably 2 years to go before the next general election. So if things are going to happen, they have to happen quickly. And so she's done what she said she was going to do, and I agree with you. And it's obvious, isn't it, that, as you say, that that budget was both a lot more than a mini budget and also divides opinion. But I think the preponderant view on the Conservative backbenches is that, well, she's doing what she said she was going to do. So, let's give it a chance. Let's see if it works. Let's hope it works.
Interesting point, because I was saying earlier on to one of the other guests is, hey, here's a politician who, lo and behold, does what she says she was going to do, shock horror, and that's to be embraced. But there's a tricky point within this, Damien, as well, and reminding folk listening to our conversation that actually you and I first met when you were a financial journalist, so you know about that stuff, how the economy works and how it's supposed to work. It's one thing for Liz to say, I'm going to reject the Treasury orthodoxy. Another when she rejects part of the Tory orthodoxy. And there are real grave concerns within your party about unfunded tax cuts, about not worrying too much about borrowing because it will lead to growth, and not worrying too much about the fact that the pound is heading for parity with the dollar. In a sense, that's a much bigger gamble for her than throwing the book out of the window that says Treasury orthodoxy.
Yes, I think that's right, that you can, if you like, you can successfully take on the Treasury if you're determined enough as a Prime Minister and a Chancellor, but taking on the bond markets is more difficult. It was Bill Clinton's advisor, Jim Carville, who famously said that if reincarnation happens, he wants to come back as the bond market, because they are the people who can really run things. And the jury is out, frankly. I mean, the initial reaction of the pound, as you say, went down, but markets can change their minds very quickly, so we'll see what happens in the months ahead. I think more significant may be that the Bank of England may feel forced to put interest rates up, partly for fear of inflation, but also to try and protect the pound. And that in itself will obviously have an effect on people with variable rate mortgages, who may therefore find the amount they're benefiting from the tax cuts to be cancelled out by the rise in their mortgage payments. So that's something to look out for, certainly.
Yeah, fascinating. In fact, your colleague Marco Longhi was on the programme in the first hour, and he said he broadly welcomed the budget across the spectrum, but he was genuinely fearful of what was happening on the interest rate front. There's a story in a couple of the papers that there are so many of you Conservative members of Parliament who are fearful that you might even abstain on some of these measures if the pound hit parity with the dollar. Is that just the wrong people talking to the wrong people, or is that a real worry?
I don't think that's a worry. I think I'd be surprised if any of my colleagues voted against tax cuts, for example. That would seem a very strange thing for a Conservative to do. I think that some of the most positive stuff is the deregulatory agenda that accompanies the tax cuts. But that's where I think there might be individual issues. Some of it I completely welcome and publicly welcome some of it that happened on Friday, but I want to preserve environmental protections. I want to preserve our landscape, and I think that the detail of what the deregulation is in areas like investment zones is going to be, it's absolutely vital to get that right, so that we can get the economic benefits from the Chancellor's proposals without having wider societal difficulties with it.
A very, very important point, although I don't think you uttered the word, I'll utter it for you. Fracking. I mean, Liz did say during her election campaign that she was in favour of lifting the ban on fracking, but with the caveat only if local people agreed to it. Many critics said, you can't do that, get real, get tough. But she has retained that. I presume you and colleagues will be watching very closely to make sure that that remains the case.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my colleagues who might have fracking in their areas are absolutely determined that, to find out what local consent means, it's got to mean something realistic. And more widely, I think on the investment zones, clearly there will be some restrictions lifted. I think if that involved taking away large amounts of green land that people value, then that would run into opposition as well. So, it is possible to pursue a successful deregulatory agenda, but it needs to be done with sensitivity, and the details of each of these individual policies will be extremely important to get right.
Yeah, as all of our emails have shown, and most of our guests have reflected, there is another area of deep sensitivity for people out there listening to us, Damien, and that is the notion of more help for the rich and less for the poor. Digby Jones, another old mate of mine, said on this programme yesterday, while the city and financial services are utterly vital to the UK economy, uncapping bankers' bonuses just look like poor politics. That's Digby Jones.
Yeah, I slightly subscribe to the view that the Chancellor expressed, that all that's happened over the past few years has been that bankers are still extremely well paid. They just stick it all on their base salary rather than on their bonus. And frankly, if they're going to get very highly paid, at least let's have them successfully earning bonuses rather than just demanding extra pay. So I think the bankers' bonus row will be a sort of Westminster row. I think much more important is for everyone across the board to feel some kind of benefit from these tax cuts. People in the end care about what's happening to their own family budget more than they care about what's happening to somebody in the City of London.
Fascinating. Very optimistic view, Damien. I'd love to talk about that again a little longer, but I've only got a couple of minutes left, so I'm going to cut to the chase on my final two questions. Liz inherited a lot of party divisions following Boris Johnson's defenestration, but also that genuine leadership contest between opinion on the left, opinion on the right, and it was quite a refreshing debate. Is she up to healing the wounds and reuniting your party?
She's certainly trying very hard. We were all invited to a series of meetings at Number 10 or at Central Office over the week where the strategy was explained. And I think the general spirit, I didn't vote for Liz. I supported Tom Tugendhat in the early rounds of the contest and then voted for Rishi. But she won. And as a Democrat, you have to say, not only, as we've said, did she win, but she's now doing what she said she was going to do. So fair enough. She's got to be given the space to do that.
And my final question is, it's clearly well briefed, and whether it's Kwasi Kwarteng's people or Number 10, I don't know. But you ain't seen nothing yet. There's a whole tranche of other matters to come in another budget, either this year or perhaps at some juncture next year. Are there one or two Damien Green warning points that you would whisper in his ear to say, given what you did on Friday, here's what you need to be cautious about if you're going to have another bite of the cherry?
I think it would all fall under the heading of there's more to politics than the economy. There's more to conservatism than tax cutting. And actually preserving our landscape, preserving our institutions, doing reform in a way that cuts with the grain of British society is extremely important. So whenever you propose a deregulatory measure, have a thought as to what this might mean in the long run, what this might mean to things that people, and obviously particularly if you like conservative supporting people or people inclined to support Conservatives, really think and care about. And that will include our national institutions, and it will certainly include the British countryside and environment. So that would be my sort of have a care note to the Chancellor and indeed the government more widely.
Damien, great to talk to you. Thanks for butting into your Sunday to spend time with us. We always appreciate it. And best to the family. See you soon, I hope. Thank you very much indeed. Damien Green there, Conservative Member of Parliament for Ashford and former Deputy Prime Minister. Go and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And whether you are a Tory, a Liberal or a member of the Labour Party, re-listen to that conversation with Damien and listen to Andy Burnham's conversation with Gloria De Piero. Two big figures who really do answer questions honestly and really do think about the big issues. It isn't always just about taxation and national insurance. Sometimes it is about the country that we live in and the way of life that we seek to pursue. Great stuff, and I'm grateful for Damien, and I'm speaking on behalf of Gloria. I know that she was equally grateful for Andy. Just a couple of seconds left to read out one or two more of your emails. Stephen says the personal allowance that we get before paying any tax should be increased to $15,000, even $20,000 a year, to help low-paid workers who are the backbone of this country. I personally agree 100% with that, Stephen. Keeley says, I wonder if Liz is planning a blinder right now Deal with the bankers now, and by the spring budget there'll be nothing for the rich and people will forget it. It'll all be about accurate forecasts based on how things have gone since the mini-budget and good news. Fingers crossed for that. There's a lot of what Damien Green said about that. It'll be a Westminster storm. It'll be fine by the spring. Bob says Liz Truss is on the right path for the bankers, the super rich and the vested interest. For the UK as a whole, not so much. One or two of you have been saying that. Glad to share it and have Bob there as the spokesperson. Peter says, sigh. Raising the lower earnings limit would benefit those in most need. Not about cutting tax. It's only taxing those who can afford it. Pete says, I'm happy to pay 40% and I was happy paying 45% to fund a fair, compassionate society, brackets. OK, I get that that's not what Tories use the money for, close quotes. Ooh, I'll never know what poverty is again, but I do remember the feeling very well, and I will do my best to support those who are less fortunate. And we did hear the very important point from Benedict Spence earlier in the programme about how the charities will see all of this because they get a lot of money themselves from the super rich. James says higher tax thresholds help the poorest most and encourage people off benefits. So there we are. Just a selection of your emails. And I want to read out one more that I have already shared with you because it seemed to me to be among the strongest. If I can find it. Here it is. Pete, raising the lower earnings limit would benefit those in most need. It's not about cutting tax. It's about only taxing those who can afford it. Just reflect upon that. It's the personal allowance. It's the amount that you can earn before you pay any tax. And there's also one for national insurance. The lowest paid do not pay tax. The lowest paid do not pay national insurance. And that, my friends, is simple arithmetic. Thank you so much for your emails. As I say, subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're at GB News. You can watch those interviews once again and all of our programmes. But that is all that we have time for this Sunday. I'll be back again next weekend from midday on Saturday, and I hope very much indeed that you can join us. Until then, have a great week. Bye-bye.
Wet and windy for northern Scotland this afternoon, but dry with sunny spells further south. Let's take a look at the details. So a windy afternoon for northern Scotland with coastal gales as a band of rain, heavy at times, pushes southwards, then clearing to sunny spells and showers, highs of 15 Celsius. A cloudy afternoon for much of Northern Ireland with a few light showers and some brighter spells. Winds will strengthen in the late afternoon. Northern England will see some bright or sunny spells as well as a few light showers, and it will become breezier. Maximum temperatures around 15 Celsius. A rather cloudy afternoon for North Wales with some bright or sunny spells at times and one or two light showers too. Turning breezy along the north coast with highs here also around 15 Celsius. It'll stay dry for the East Midlands with sunny spells and light winds. Temperatures will peak at around the average for this time of year, that's around 16 Celsius. A pleasant autumn afternoon for East Anglia with some longer sunny spells and light winds, although it may be a touch breezier towards the coast. Highs of 16. Southern England will see a fine afternoon with sunny spells and light winds. Afternoon temperatures are likely to peak along the south coast with highs of 18 or 19 Celsius. Throughout the rest of the day, rain and stronger winds will continue southwards across the north of the UK. That's how the weather is shaping us up across the rest of the day.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland. On TV,
on radio and online. We're proud to be
the People's Channel,
Britain's
news channel.